Good afternoon. My name is Allison Schweitzer. I'm the Director of Finance with Garrett County Public Schools. Unfortunately, at the recent board meeting on March 14th, the evening got late and the weather got pretty terrible. So President Mr. Woods called the meeting a little bit after 10 o'clock, and we've decided that the best course of action is to share this presentation in the form of a Zoom format so that the information can be shared publicly as well as with the board. So this afternoon, I will be sharing the fiscal year 2024 budget development series revised draft revenue calculations. The objective of this presentation is to inform our stakeholders of where we are in the development process of the FY 2024 operating budget. I do want to remind all of our stakeholders that there is a budget development resource page that's found on our website. If you go to garrettcountyschools.org, up in the top ribbon, there's a support service link. Click on that, and then it'll take you to a little drop down. Click on Finance. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the FY24 budget development link right there. So all of our presentations are there, as well as the video from the board meetings. There's also lots of other useful information that we use to develop the budget each and every year. So this presentation will include a deep dive into our fund level budgeting. We'll talk about the revised draft state and local revenue calculations. We'll also discuss the local aid compliance changes, the impact of local wealth relative to other counties, and then we'll also talk about some next steps in our budget development process for fiscal year 2024. First, let's dive into the Garrett County Board of Education funds. So we maintain a fund level budgeting and accounting structure that meets the state mandate for local school systems as detailed in the financial reporting manual for Maryland Public Schools. We budget and report our three major funds: the current expense fund, the school construction fund, and a food service fund. Now, when we're talking about developing the budget development process, we're primarily talking about the unrestricted fund in the current expense fund. So we have a graphic here that has all the different pieces that go into that operating budget, the current expense fund. And so that's the restricted funds. Those are our grants. That's the purple bubble. We have an orange bubble, which is the student activity accounts. Those are the school checking accounts that are controlled by the principals and the school secretaries. And then the big blue bubble is the unrestricted funds, which is this operating budget that we're discussing today. The current expense revenues come from state and local funds for the operating budget. For the restricted fund, it's special revenue sources that are restricted in use, such as Title I or special education, IDEA pass-through. The student activity account fund revenues come from school level fundraising or different activities that they have at the school. The school construction fund is a specific special use fund in which we use those funds for school construction, for major projects. They're one-time use revenues and expenditures. Some of the funding sources include our local government, the state CIP program, Aging Schools, Program Open Space, Healthy Schools, and the Capital Grant Program. The largest of which is the state CIP program through the IAC, the Interagency School Construction Group. Then you'll see that the food service fund is also a special revenue fund, and that account is made up of all of the food and nutrition service programs. The revenues are generated by federal programs and the meal revenues from the served meals. None of the food service expenses run through this operating budget that we'll be discussing. It is important to note that when Mr. Wieslowski presented the bid awards as part of the first portion of the meeting on March 14th, that all of those projects had very specific funding sources, and they're all one-time capital projects that run through that school construction fund. Therefore, those revenues are unable to be used in the operating budget or for our day-to-day activities. Once spending is complete for the fiscal year, GCPS staff prepares the annual financial report, and all of these elements are rolled up and reported on that one report each year. Next, we have a overall big picture of what the operating budget revenue looks like for fiscal year 2024. Normally, we have these numbers for you at the February board meeting, but because of the delays at the state level in interpreting and calculating new formulas, as well as the net taxable income estimates changing from the comptroller's office, the reliable calculations were delayed until February 17th. You can see here in the bottom right-hand corner that there is an increase expected year over year from fiscal year 2023 to 2024 of $1,137,255. That is a 2.16% increase year over year. In the pie chart that you see in the upper left-hand corner, you see the major sources of these revenues. County government is our largest source with 53.1%, which is actually down from the prior year, which was 54.7%. The state of Maryland is actually up at 46.6%, and last year they had contributed 44.9%. The local, other, and the federal funding are the same year over year. While we are pleasantly feeling good about the increase of $1.1 million, we have projected that likely year over year our increase will be around 2% per year when you calculate the per pupil increases that are written into statute. Unfortunately, Garrett County Public Schools expenses aren't increasing at a rate of about 8% per year due to blueprint requirements and inflation. So while this is good news, we're still concerned about the expense side of our budget. Now we'll take a deep dive into the state aid year-over-year comparison. So we're highlighting the state of Maryland and their major state aid programs year over year. So in the first column, you'll have the approved budget of FY 2023, and then side by side with the estimated revenue of 2024. The big increase this year is in compensatory education. Compensatory education is driven by our free and reduced meal application numbers. There was a change this year that resulted in a 24% increase in that eligible enrollment due to the blueprint legislation changes. Free and reduced meal students not only complete a form now, but there's also a process of direct certification for certain eligibility requirements, as well as MA eligible students are directly eligible as a FARMS. So therefore, throughout the state, the compensatory education amount has increased substantially. And you can see in Garrett County, we're experiencing a 23.3% increase. And this is really driving the overall increase in state aid. The other increases that you see are in special education, transportation, pre-kindergarten, and the teacher salary or national board certification increases. The special education, we did have a slight increase in that eligible enrollment. Transportation is an increase due to the inflationary factor, and you see that's 8.1%. And then the pre-K, the pre-kindergarten increase is due to a change. Last year, the eligible enrollment was based off of a proxy or a state estimate, and this year it's based upon actual Tier 1 eligible enrollment. Unfortunately, we did see the state reducing their participation in our foundation program by 1.4%, or $175,538. We also had a decrease in the transitional supplemental instruction. Those are those K through 3 Tier 1 students. And that's also operating still off of a proxy, so that's an estimate. Now we'll take a deep dive into the county government year-over-year calculation. This is not normally how we have looked at our county or our local share of revenue for our operating budget. However, due to the major changes that blueprint legislation required, now the local revenue must be used for program revenues, just as the state has been. However, there are even more strict requirements with this funding than there was in the past. We are required, each local education agency is required now to spend those dollars at the school level by the allowable costs for each of those programs. Therefore, we've lost a considerable amount of flexibility or local autonomy to spend this local share the way that Garrett County Public Schools, the superintendent, and the Board of Education would like to spend them. Just like the state numbers, we have the FY 2023 numbers compared to the FY 2024 numbers. Now you'll recall that we are implementing the blueprint. So last year we received the allocations, but we were not required to budget, monitor, and then report on it. However, the state of Maryland is requiring that we provide benchmark data for how we are spending these dollars currently and at which schools. So one piece that I'd like to highlight in the larger chart is the highlighted row that says local MOE autonomy. So last year, or in FY 2023, the county government was required to fund the Garrett County Public Schools by the local maintenance of effort test. When we applied that test and then applied all of the dollars to match the state amounts, Garrett County Public Schools had about $2.7 million that was not a required match. That allowed the superintendent to make recommendations and the board to approve a budget in which the school system could spend the dollars at the schools in which we felt were the highest priority. In the FY 2023 budget, this money was used to cover transportation expenses that are over and above the transportation expenses that are provided by the state. You'll note that there is no state match for transportation, or no local match for transportation. Also, we used about 1.17 million of that 2.7 to match for special education. As is the case across the state with other school systems, the amount of funding that we're receiving for special education is not enough to cover the overall expense. So we did use that local autonomy amount to plug that number as well. That left a flexibility of about $389,000 that we could place where we felt was the best place. So here we have the program revenue per pupil split for fiscal year 2024. So at the February board meeting, we took a deep dive into each of those program revenues, the allowable costs, the enrollment eligibility of each, and the out years of what those per pupil amounts were. I encourage everyone to go back and watch or look at those slides, and that'll help you pull this all together for what this chart is showing. At the last presentation, you saw the totals amount. So on the foundation, you see $8,642. That's the total per pupil allotment for the foundation for students kindergarten through 12. It's made up by the state share and so for Garrett County, that's $3,633.98 that the state of Maryland is contributing to the foundation. County government is contributing $5,008.02. So therefore, the split we have is 58% local and 42% state. Then you'll see that each weight for each of the subgroups is listed below. The split between the state share and the local share, or the percentage that that the state or the local are to fund education, is based upon formulas in statute that are wealth equalized. We will be discussing wealth equalized model further on in the presentation. So GCPS staff has received questions concerning the student groups that have been identified as subgroups. These student groups were identified through the work of the Kirwan Commission. At this time, a change in legislation will require that statute be altered in order to make these changes for eligibility. So here we have another chart, another big picture chart, if you will, of the overall operating budget revenue for FY24 for Garrett County Public Schools. This pulls together the state share and the local share of the totals and provides the total by program, so that the public can see the totality of the dollars that we're receiving. Couple items to note: Garrett County Public Schools does not receive 3 different program revenues. The guaranteed tax base, this is due to the eligibility requirement and statute. Garrett County is deemed quote unquote too wealthy to receive this piece of funding. There's also the comparable wage adjustment, and this is also this is actually hard-coded in statute, in which Garrett receives 0. So there would have to be a legislative change in order for Garrett County to ever receive comparable wage index funding. And then the education effort adjustment is a shift from local to state. And again, Garrett County does not qualify due to the relative wealth of our county. So now to analyze this chart a little bit in a little bit more depth, it's important to note that the transportation line does not require a local match. And that's an issue for Garrett County because our transportation does run well over the $3.9 million that we're receiving. So we'll be required to use some of those foundation dollars, the $29.6 million, to cover the gap in the transportation line. Again, we talked about the special education, the $2,671,536 will not adequately cover our expenses in special education. One other note on this chart is that there is a line called Blueprint Transition. There is not a local match for Blueprint Transition, and this funding is not required to follow the student to the school by a specific use. However, it is intended to be used for Blueprint Transition, as it's called. So here we're going to take a deep dive into this Blueprint Transition funding. So what this funding is going to allow Garrett County to do is to more smoothly implement Blueprint. We've discussed weighted student funding at all of these presentations, and we've recognized from the analysis that we've done from fiscal 2022 actual expenditure numbers that we do have some schools that are over allocated, and we have some other schools that are under allocated. In order to right size the allocations, what Garrett County Public Schools would need to do is shift resources from one school to another. And so what these Blueprint Transition funds will do is it will allow us to not have to quote unquote rip off a Band-Aid, but there are places that we can kind of use this as a stopgap to leave possibly a teacher or a student support worker of some sort. Now, I will caution you that this is the largest amount of money that we will receive this year. So in the schedule for the out years is there in the bottom in the box. So in fiscal year 2024, we will receive the $1.2 million. Beginning in 2025, that dollar amount will decrease each year until FY30 when it is eliminated. Now, one of the struggles is that in the prior year, we had the luxury of this Blueprint Transition funding plus that local maintenance of effort autonomy that we talked about a little while ago up here in this $2.7 million. So when you took both of those pieces of funding, you had nearly $3.9 million or 7.3% of the operating budget in which we had full autonomy to spend those dollars where we saw fit. Now, Garrett County Public Schools only has that $1.2 million or 2.2% of our budget. This is why we are discussing these weighted student funding analysis at such great detail so that people can understand that while we as a school system may wish to spend our dollars at certain schools, unfortunately, we are required to follow this compliance, of which 75% of those other program revenues must be spent at the school level in which the student is enrolled. Now we'll discuss the local aid compliance changes. So beginning last year for the the fiscal year 2023, there was a two-pronged test that dictated the lowest or the minimum amount that county government was required to fund a local education agency. So the tests are basically the greater of these two formulas. So the first one is maintenance of effort, or MOE. Maintenance of effort is our traditional go-to historically referenced formula in which you take the eligible enrollment and you multiply it by a per pupil amount. When we were able to use funding this way, we were able to spend it wherever and however we deemed fit. Now, there's a second test, and it's called the local share. The local share is the per pupil allocation by program revenue divided by 2, and then apply a wealth equalizing factor to each of the rates. So by each of those program, the amounts of the program, you divide it by 2 and then apply this wealth equalizing factor. The programs that this is affecting or are involved in this requirement are the foundation, compensatory education, special education, English learners, transitional supplemental instruction, pre-kindergarten, the post-CCR CTE pathways, and then salary increases for national board certification teachers. Finally, we're going to discuss the impact of local wealth. So in the state of Maryland, we have been and continue to be a wealth equalizing state in which schools are funded in a way that promotes equity across the whole state of Maryland. So regardless of where you live, the methodology is that the state will participate in a way that allows the locals to participate in a way that they have the ability to pay for their share of the education costs. Their ability to pay is based upon their ability to generate wealth through tax income. The 2 tax revenues that are reviewed are the property tax and the income tax. This is where there's a lot of concern or question about how in Garrett County we can have a relatively low income tax or some of the lowest income earners in the state. However, we're still considered a wealthy county, and that is because of the property-based wealth. So in fiscal 2023, Garrett County was ranked 4th overall with a 5.9% increase in their wealth or their ability to generate taxes. The statewide average was 2.7%. So you can see that Garrett County's taxable base increased at a greater rate than the average of the state. Now in fiscal year 2024, Garrett County is ranked 6th. So we actually went down with a 6.7% increase. The statewide average, though, increased to 4.4%. So our relative wealth, based upon the rest of the state, is now ranked in at 6th. So that's one of the reasons why you saw that change from the locals picking up a higher percentage last year and then backing down a bit, and the state picking up a higher percentage because Garrett County's relative wealth dropped 2 places. So coming up with our budget development, we are presenting on April 3rd to the county commissioners in the courthouse in their presentation room. This presentation will be a blueprint for Maryland's future implementation as well as a revenue presentation. We have added a presentation for April 11th. That is not here, but we have decided to do that as of last evening. And then on May 9th, 2023, we will have a presentation of the superintendent's proposed unrestricted operating budget. We're hopeful that at the June 13th board meeting, the board will adopt that operating budget, and then we can begin our fiscal year on July 1st. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact me, Allison Schweitzer, at Garrett County Public Schools. My email address is Allison, ALISON.Schweitzer at garrettcountyschools.org. Thanks so much and have a great day.